This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 588, entitled "Women who want kids should vote for the Menfairing of the gender laws." Description. This flyer explains how it is very much in women's self-interest to vote with the Masculists for the Menfairing of the gender laws. Young men today, in their millions, are rejecting marriage and paternity due to the toxicity of divorce, as generated by the hated monoconscious feminists who have taken over the divorce courts, who butcher the lives of one father in 4. With women, that is, female Masculists, voting with Masculists for the Menfairing of the gender laws, the divorce courts will be fundamentally reformed, making them much less toxic for men. The GECs, Gender Equality Committees, will be set up in the parliaments. The paternity rejection right, will be legislated. So too the OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth, for all births, to block women's paternity fraud, etc. Masculists need to push women very hard to become female Masculists in both sexes' self-interests, especially in women's self-interest, if ever women want to have babies again. The flyer itself. Women who want kids should vote for the Menfairing of the gender laws, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. More and more millions of men, particularly young men, are waking up to the toxicity of the divorce courts, taken over by the feminists who butcher divorcing fathers at a rate of one father in 4, resulting in millions of young men wiping their hands of marriage and paternity, since they absolutely refuse to face a 1 in 4 chance of losing their kids. So choose instead to live the MGTOW, that's men going their own way, lifestyle of latting, LAT, living apart together, where the man and the woman have their own abode and both are FIPs, that's financially independent persons, where there is no divorce because no marriage, no alimony because no marriage and no kids. As a result of the rise of MGTOW, millions of young women now are finding it increasingly a thing that young men refuse to give them their sperm, so that millions of young women are really waking up to the horror, in brackets for them, that they truly, in capital letters, are not going to have a kid. This prospect terrifies them, since their biology, their monthly period, tells them that they are physically constituted to reproduce. Millions of young women now screw around in their 20s, but routinely have an epiphany around the age of 30 that they had better change their tune in their 30s and reproduce, otherwise their biological clock will stop ticking and they will end up barren, childless, and men will stop looking at them, since men find young, fertile women a lot more sexually alluring than a woman in her late 30s or older. So, what can women do to increase the odds of having a kid or two? Question mark. This question is increasingly on the minds of young women. One obvious answer, in brackets, well, obvious to men, to Masculists, close brackets, is that part of the solution is to increase the willingness of men to be fathers again. But that is not going to happen in the short term. In fact, just the opposite, due to the awful toxicity of the divorce courts taken over by the monoconscious feminists who know nothing about masculism, who treat men as cash machines and abuse divorcing fathers so badly that nearly all young men in Western countries now have received the memo of, quote, "Don't marry, don't have kids, avoid the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, don't take the risk of 1 chance in 4 of losing your kids." in a hated feminist-controlled divorce court. So instead, live the MGTOW, MGTOW lifestyle, spending your money on yourself, avoiding marriage and paternity." End quote. So the problem for women who want men to give them their sperm and to be active fathers is deep and requires a lot of work to solve. This flyer is about that deep solution, and it is a masculist solution that, if implemented, will cause profound changes in society. But as I see it, there's no alternative. We, as a society, just have to bite the bullet and make these profound changes in society if we are to survive and not wipe ourselves out due to our unwillingness to reproduce. So, what has to be done so that young men are prepared to be fathers again, willing to give young women their sperm? Obviously, the divorce courts need to be taken out of the hands of the fluffy feminists who are monoconscious, who know nothing about masculine ideas, so see men as cash machines put on this earth to pay for women to have babies. Masculists are putting tremendous moral pressure on young women to FIP up by bothering to get career-competent educations so that they can be FIPs as adults, not expecting fluffy style to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man for decades of his life. The primary political goal of the Masculists is the creation of a FIP society, where both sexes are socialised by parents and educated by teachers to be FIPs, so that young men are not expected to run a 1 in 4 chance of being butchered in a fluffy feminist-controlled divorce court system that will rip his kids away from him with a 90% probability, which is the norm in many Western countries. Masculists are very conscious that it was men who liberated women. Women's lib, feminism, would not have existed on a mass scale without men setting up the preconditions for feminism, that is, giving women male-invented science-based medicine, so that women today have a life expectancy of 85 years, and hence a career window of half a century. So masculists point the finger at women and tell them in very strong moral terms, quote, "Now that you women can work, you must work. Anything else is man's slavery, and man's slavery will get you killed. It is so hated by the masculists." End quote. So masculists are pushing for the fipping of women, that is, pushing very hard for women to be made FIPs, who expect to be financially independent by bothering to get career-competent educations so that they can be FIPs as adults and not expect to manslave a man for decades of his life. Masculists are pushing for the establishment of GECs, GECs, that's gender equality committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally, which is far from being the case today. The male half of these GECs will legislate the paternity rejection right. That will allow men to reject paternity, which would be the male equivalent of women's maternity rejection right, aka abortion right. Women today have the legislated right to reject an unwanted pregnancy that could ruin their lives, but men don't. So millions of men are forced into unwanted paternities that do ruin their lives, forced to pay for a kid that he didn't want in the first place, and often the unwanted kid is, in capital letters, not even his. So the masculists are becoming increasingly political, angry, hateful, verbally violent, and talking increasingly of a sex war, full of hate against the massive gender injustice committed by society, and particularly women against men. We masculists are fed up with this situation and are out to change it. The smarter masculists are aware that major changes in society, that is, this masculisting of society, need not be an affair for men alone. Masculist theorists are very conscious of the fact that it is very much in both sexes' self-interest to push for these masculist reforms in society. For example, for women, that is for young women who want to have babies, it is in their self-interest to vote with men, with the masculists, for the Menfairing of the gender laws, that is to become female masculists, so that the divorce courts are made much less toxic for men, so that young men are a lot more prepared to be fathers again. The divorce courts need to be taken out of the hands of the fluffy feminists who see men as cash machines to be robbed and abused. Alimony needs to be thrown out. Custody of kids after a divorce should be made joint by default. The halving of wealth and stuff should be thrown out, so that divorce is based on a principle of the financial independence of both divorcing parties, so that men do not feel butchered by a divorce, as is the case today. So it is in women's self-interest to vote with men for the Menfairing of the gender laws. So women need to become female masculists, to push for the establishment of the GECs in the parliaments, so that the para is legislated, the OPTAB 2, brackets, obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births, so that paternity fraud by women is blocked, so that cuckolded so-called fathers can use the para to block paying for a kid that is not even his. To make all this practical, it's essential that society be fipped, so that women need to fip up, so that they expect to be fips and not expect to be saved financially by some Prince Charming, that is, some stupid, gullible, man-slavable man who is prepared to work for her for decades of his life. The core idea of masculism is that it is a rebellion by men against being a man-slave for a woman, working for her for decades. Millions of men are now waking up to the Masculist message to free men from man-slavery, putting powerful moral pressure on women to get off their fat parasitic asses and fip up, or be severely punished by men, masculisted men in capital letters, by not getting one. Left to rot on the shelf by being totally ignored by men for being a hated, man-slaving, divorce-raping, bloody fluffy. Forced to die a slow, miserable death, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and utterly rejected, spat at. So women who want kids need to become female masculists who combine forces with the masculists and push for the Menfairing of the gender laws and for society in general. The sooner the divorce courts are reformed, the sooner the GECs are established, the sooner society is made bi-conscious, that is, made aware that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, then men will be more willing to be fathers again, and then women will be able to have kids more easily. Until the fipping of women, the Menfairing of the gender laws in society, the lower are the odds of women getting pregnant, and getting pregnant by quality men, since it is the quality men who are the first to go masculist due to their higher intelligence. Masculists really need to push the idea that they need to push women to become female masculists, so that both sexes combine forces to menfair the gender laws in both sexes' self-interests. For men, having menfair gender laws is obvious to men's benefit. For women, having menfair gender laws will allow women to be mothers again, which is something that women desperately want, but are being increasingly deprived of today due to the lack of menfair gender laws, the lack of the fipping of women, due to the bigoted monoconsciousness of feminism, etc. A lot has yet to be done. Society has to be restructured and reformed along masculist lines before women have babies again. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 580 plus Masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.